April Allen. April is the President and COO of the Southern Gateway Public Green Foundation, which, as you know, is developing the deck park that you see here. And today she's going to talk to us a little bit about the importance of public space. So we're going to start first with a video, and then we'll welcome April.
Thank you.
The problem is that you could take a highway like 35 and it could be a divider amongst. You could cut North Oak Cliff away from East Oak Cliff. And what the Southern Gateway Park does is it turns that into a uniter. It brings it together. And so it's so important that this project happens and gets off the ground, and it's going to take everybody.
Patience is turning into a big payoff in the form of a new Southern Sector deck park.
As they now watch the foundation beams go in, supporters say this new deck park will bring the community together, and not just physically.
It was really important to our board to center this project in equity, particularly given the fact that this really was a community-driven idea and project.
Growing up as a little girl in Oak Cliff was idyllic. You can see the culture in everything that is happening in Oak Cliff right now. The Southern Gateway Park is being created for and by the people.
We engaged hundreds of people really in how they hope to see this park really impact their day-to-day lives. I just think it's important for our community to know that this project isn't just an idea, it's happening right now. We like to say we're not shovel ready, we're shoveling. You can drive south of I-30 today and see the progress that's being made by TxDOT. As they widen the freeway, they're also building the supports over the interstate. We're just excited to see this park come to fruition.
I think that we really have a great opportunity to show all of the different uniqueness about Oak Cliff.
And because of this park, you're going to see tremendous growth and the resources for communities that we've never seen before in Southern Dallas.
Morning, everyone, and great to be here with you. Talk a bit about Southern Gateway Park. Show of hands, has anyone heard about the project? Oh, okay, great. So that's good. Oh, yeah, let me turn my mic on, sorry. Okay, that's better. Let me get myself situated here. So I like to start, and let me get this clicker. Okay, I do like to start with just a bit of the importance. We're talking about the importance of public spaces, and I'll kind of give you an overview of the project as well. But we do call this a park with a purpose because not only are we building a green space that the entire community will be able to enjoy, certainly people in the surrounding area as well as all the regional visitors that we expect to come to the park. But we also have a hope that we can use the park to be really intentional about improving quality of life for the people surrounding it, and I can talk a bit about that later. And then also, of course, we want to hopefully spur the type of economic growth and opportunity that's been missing in this part of town. So I grew up in Toronto. Originally I'm from Toronto, Canada. And I like to share that, for me growing up, I got to know all kinds of different people from different walks of life. We played, in parks together. We went to school together. We came from different faiths and different backgrounds, but kind of learned about our differences and our similarities because we were interacting with each other and forced to be among each other. Toronto's a very multicultural city. And I think particularly as we grapple with some of the tensions in our democracy right now, that parks can play that role. It really is a space that is reflective of our democracy. Kids can play on a playground together. You would have no idea sort of where they're from, what their backgrounds are, and we see that certainly during the pandemic, parks became even more important. So I think the more that we can build these places in our community that can force us to connect with each other and connect with people who are outside of our kind of typical bubbles, the better off our culture will be. But also they do have this added benefit of being able to sort of improve quality of life for the people around it, and, as I said, spur the type of economic opportunity and growth that is needed in Southern Dallas. We've seen that happen. We have the example of Clyde Warren and the impact that it had in bringing bringing Uptown and Downtown together, and certainly a different neighborhood, because that's a primarily commercial district. But Clyde Warren cites that they've impacted that area to the tune of $6 billion. And the City of Dallas's Parks Department commissioned a study by HRNA a few years ago that talked about the impact of parks and the dollar invested in parks and what that returns to the community. So it is kind of interesting that parks have so many, are multi-purpose in that way. Particularly, I think, as we have this migration of folks from the coasts to Dallas, we have this untapped opportunity in Southern Dallas to really grow our community and and I think instead of ceding all of that territory to our northern suburban folks, we should be taking advantage of what we've got to offer here in Dallas, and we certainly have lots of amenities that people can gravitate towards. So I'll tell you a bit about, I'll just tell you next slide. Okay, so I do share that most people may not know that 60% of the landmass in Dallas is actually south of I-30. So Southern Dallas makes up a very large portion of our city, but represents just 10% of the property tax value. That's, obviously resulted from decades of all kinds of inequity and inequitable policies, and a focus on growing our city north. So we have an opportunity to kind of right-size that balance, and we believe that this park can really help to address that. Let's go to the next slide. This is kind of sharing some of those stats we talked about. Just, you may have heard of the Freakonomics podcast that was done, a couple of episodes talking about the migration of people from the coast to Dallas. Why Dallas? And a lot of that growth, like I said, is actually happening north of our city. So we've got an opportunity to kind of capitalize on that. And I think that the huge untapped opportunity is in Southern Dallas. Next slide. To start with just kind of a bit of history and background. So this is a visual of the historic town of Oak Cliff. And back in the 50s, the freeways were being built all over the country, really, and decisions were made about where they would go. We know that a lot of those decisions had some inequitable undertones, but this freeway divided historic Oak Cliff and really cut off historic Freedmanstown. It actually went right through it, 10th Street Historic District, and of course continued down south. And so, those neighborhoods kind of were cut off and divided, and we continue to feel the effects of that to this day. You couple that with, as I mentioned, inequitable housing policy, inequitable transportation policy, inequitable education policy, and the communities, particularly on the east side of the freeway, but also on the west side, continue to feel the effects of that. But this is Oak Cliff. We all live here and are proud residents. We're really proud of the heritage here, proud of the way that we interact and live amongst each other and get to know each other. And I think we have an opportunity to share that with the rest of our city through this park. So I'm really excited about the possibilities. Next slide. So the park's going to be built over Interstate 35. If you've driven south of, if you've driven over there recently, you've seen or you've been driving under the bridge that's being built. It's currently under construction. So when it's complete, it'll be just about 5 acres. And I'm going to stand over here. When it's complete, it'll be about 5 acres, which is about the same footprint as Clyde Warren's current site. And but we are building it in 2 phases. If you go to the next slide. And so phase 1 is a little over half of the park, and that's what's currently under construction right now. So that's the bridge that you see. Phase 2 is currently unfunded, but with all of the infrastructure funds that are flowing right now from the federal government, we're working hard with our public partners to identify funding for the second phase. So we certainly don't want to, do one half of the park and then not get the other half completed. So that's definitely a focus. we do consider it, I talk about it being kind of a nexus for connectivity in a bunch of different ways. So if you think about kind of everything that's happening on the west side, west of 35 and south of 30, starting with Trinity Groves in West Dallas, the Simmons Park will eventually come online, then into Sylvan 30, Bishop Arts, Wynwood, even down to Redbird. And then on the east side, we've got, the new Convention Center hotel that was announced. Over in the Cedars, there'll be a ton of growth over there. We're seeing that already in South Dallas and around the Forest Theater, and then over to Fair Park. So there's a ton of stuff happening on both sides of the freeway in southern Dallas, but this park really kind of brings it all together and creates a point of connectivity. And it will be, go back one, it will be, truly a kind of gateway to Dallas by virtue of where we are on I-35. As Mayor Rawlings likes to say, this is, going to be the front yard to Dallas. So everyone driving up and down 35 will hit the park first from all points south. So a ton of visibility, and we have been really intentional about making sure this park reflects Oak Cliff. There's also a ton of transportation projects happening in this area. Along Ewing Avenue, the City of Dallas has a Complete Streets project that was funded in the last bond, and so they'll be making that a much more pedestrian-friendly street, widening it, adding bike lanes. There is a study looking at the potential extension of the streetcar that currently comes in to Bishop Arts, extending it over to the park so it kind of makes a natural connection with the Zoo Dart Station over there. And then also looking at extending hike and bike trails to this area. So lots of activity on the transportation and connectivity front as well. Next slide. At our core, we're a public-private partnership. So the park will ultimately live under the City of Dallas's Parks and Recreation Department and be owned by the city, be a public park. But our foundation, which I lead and my colleague Jessica here works with us, will be constructing it, is responsible for developing it, will ultimately manage and operate it as well. Next slide. To give you a sense of funding, the entire project is a little over $170 million. And so that's the type of investment that hasn't happened in this area for a very long time. So we're excited about that. That's split between the first and second phase, a little over 80 million on the first phase and 90 million on the second phase. And on the first phase, we got public funding to the tune of almost $50 million for the bridge. And then our foundation is privately raising money to fund the amenities that we'll share with you in a bit. Next slide. We made some recent announcements that you may have seen in the news. Last month we announced, or was that, it was actually more than a month ago, we announced at City Hall that we had hit our milestone of reaching over 75% funded on the first phase. So we had about $15 million in private funds raised in the last couple months that we're really excited about. So we have about 20 million left to go on funding the amenities for the first phase. Next slide. We did do an economic impact analysis with UNT Dallas's School of Business, and they identified almost $1 billion of economic impact in the first 5 years from the Phase 1 park. That's driven by visitors to the park. So to give you an idea of just how many people we expect to be coming here, Clyde Warren has about a million visitors a year. The zoo already has over 1 million visitors a year, and their intention is to double that. So they actually have their own master plan where they're going to be moving the entrance to the zoo off the access road over to Ewing, turning much of what's currently surface parking lot adjacent to the park into public park space, and then also building a parking garage in the future. So, and their goal is to double their attendance. One of their urban planners cited the limiting factor for them was the lack of other venues that surround it to really help it grow. So this park should really be great synergy for them, and vice versa. We'll have all those folks kind of at our front door, not to mention the people who would be coming just for the park itself. We really do think that there'll be a huge influx of folks from particularly the southern suburbs as well, who don't have many of these amenities and would prefer not to have to cross into downtown to get to some of the things that are in the north of 30. So next slide. We also, so that economic impact is really important to us, but it was also really important to center our project in equity. And so we spent a year doing outreach to the community, making sure that people had a seat at the table as we develop the plans for the park as well as the programming. So many of you in the room may have participated in those meetings, but we engaged hundreds of people really in our equitable development process. We were awarded an award for our community engagement by the Urban Design Planning Council. I may have gotten that wrong. Last year, Greater Dallas Urban Planning Council. Anyway, and so we're thrilled that we were able to kind of get that input from folks. We framed it in these 6 areas. So how we can use the park to reflect the unique history and culture of Oak Cliff, how we can use it to help mitigate some of the health and wellness disparities that exist in the community. This is a community surrounding the park that's had some of the highest incidents in the COVID. When you hear those statistics about life expectancy being 20 years below some parts north versus south, some of the census tracts around the park are those reference points. So we really want to be intentional about what that looks like, how we use the park to extend educational opportunities. We're surrounded by a ton of schools. Of course, Townview is a mile away and many others. And so how we can use it for things like after school programming, in partnership with the zoo potentially, and also outside of the kind of K-12 environment, working with adults on things like financial literacy and preparing for small business. And we've already been doing that in partnership with one of our bank partners, even now before the park opens. Economic development, we want to use the park to kind of lift up small businesses. Oak Cliff is all about buying local and really supporting our small business owners. And so we've been working with some of the owners to kind of think through what that might look like and some of the priorities that folks might have in terms of the offering and the format. And then also as we construct the park, how we can be really intentional about diverse contracting so that when we build the park and spend the $30 million to construct it, we are working with contractors that kind of reflect the community surrounding the park. Diverse housing options, people ask a lot about gentrification. Will this gentrify people out of their neighborhoods? And that's obviously not our goal. And so we're hoping to tackle that in a couple ways. One is just being an advocate for diverse housing options. So as landowners surrounding the park start thinking about what their plans are, we're building relationships with them and advocating for a mix, not just market rate, but also workforce housing, senior housing, building a diverse community, which is what we all enjoy and want. And then the other way we're tackling that is on the policy front. So I mentioned I'm from Toronto. I lived in New York, Boston, Atlanta before Dallas, and all of those cities had rapidly growing neighborhoods that were concerned about preserving the people who lived in those communities. And the way they addressed that was by instituting policies around property tax abatement, overlays, or freezing property values for a certain period of time. And that's harder to do in Texas because it has to be done at the legislative level. So we're working with some of our other park partners and others in our city to really look, particularly with the upcoming legislative session, what are the policy solutions that we can all coalesce around and advocate for to kind of mitigate some of the challenges that all of us will experience. We want the growth. We want people to benefit from that growth because we know, rising home values are really what a lot of times build generational wealth in families. We don't want them to be flooded out in the process. One of the analogies one of our board members uses is we want to water the fields enough that the soil is rich, but we don't want to flood people out in the process. So, and then safe and stable neighborhoods. How do we use this park to really improve the safety and stability in the community? And that we're thinking of in terms of things like lighting and crosswalks, and of course, just by keeping it very active, that will also help to improve. Next slide. So we took all that input that we got from our equitable development process. We coupled that with the research our design team did. We hired HKS architects and SWA landscape architects to work on our design. Now, some of you, if you've been around long enough, may have seen the initial design for the park, which many years ago was done by the same architect that did Clyde Warren. That was done to kind of get the ball rolling in terms of getting the park built. But our board decided to take a step back and restart that process and make sure that it was very community informed. And so that's where we hired HKS and SWA. And the principals of those two firms were both Oak Cliff residents, deep roots, and so really kind of understood what we were trying to do. So next slide. We settled on these design goals. The park will be a gateway to Dallas, as I mentioned, by virtue of where we are in I-35. We want it to feel distinctly Oak Cliff. We heard that loud and clear from all of our community outreach, but certainly all of us on the team are really keyed into that as well. Of course, we want it to be responsive to the public realm, integrate with the zoo, integrate with the neighborhood, and be very accessible and connected. So next slide. This is a typical street in Oak Cliff. Like, if you kind of think of that as I talk through the park's master plan, you know, we're used to topography in Oak Cliff. We're on an escarpment that's very different than the rest of Dallas. Once you cross the Trinity, it's basically flat to Oklahoma. We see, it's very common to see this rock formation, tree cover, and elevation change. And so we were able to sort of incorporate that into the design in a really interesting way on the next slide. So the designers realized that there is an elevation change from Marsalis to Ewing, and so kind of incorporated that into the design of the park. So we've got, instead of just a flat park, a really neat kind of elevation changes that exist in the park from one end to the other. But on each corner there will be kind of 4 big iconic towers. We've got a stage pavilion number 2 on the top right there. Of course, we'll have, you know, concerts, and of course it could also provide shade when it's hot outside. A large open kind of great lawn. Number 4 at the top there is a turnaround off the southbound access road where we could host food trucks, but we could also host mobile health clinics. And we've been talking to some of our health partners about that already. Number 5 is the main pedestrian thoroughfare that goes through the park. We call it the 12th Street Promenade. It actually runs right into 12th Street that was divided when the freeway was built. And we're planning to turn that into a history walk. So we're working with our Community Advisory Council on identifying people and organizations that were important to Oak Cliff's history, people who've made a contribution, and kind of telling some of those untold stories, maybe inducting a class of those every year. So we're working through the ideas there. Number 6 is there's a ramp that kind of goes down into the park, and there's a rock formation kind of escarpment feature along that ramp. Number 7 is a large children's area that traverses the northbound service road. 8 is a bridge that will come in over the access road from the zoo in the future when they turn all of what's currently surface parking lot here into public park, and then they've got plans for a parking garage on the other side. Number 9 is an outdoor amphitheater, kind of classroom space. So that's where we're thinking we could be really intentional about our education in partnership with the zoo, doing demonstrations, et cetera. Number 10, we've got several water features throughout the park. In fact, a really neat kind of rain curtain feature that comes down from that bridge coming in over from the zoo. Number 11, you walk across that bridge to the rooftop of number 12, which is where our restaurant and retail space would be. So it has great views to downtown, and our kind of restaurant retail meeting space is tucked in under the phase 2 lawn, which is on the left-hand side there. So if we go to the next slide, we can show you it's kind of split between phase 1 and phase 2. So phase 1 is what's currently under construction, and those are the amenities that we're planning to build first. We tried to push most of the amenities that were asked for from community members into this first phase. Next slide is kind of a rendering of the entire park. So this is Ewing on this end. Marsalis would be in the background. Everything you're seeing in the foreground are the phase 1 amenities. So there are those towers I mentioned, the pavilion, stage pavilion, open lawn, that ramp coming down, children's areas along the left-hand side. There's that building kind of tucked in the middle, the turnaround off the access road with the food trucks. So we're really excited about this design and feel like it really is reflective of everything we heard from community members in terms of making this park uniquely reflective of our community. Next slide. I think we have just a few more views of the renderings. We can keep going through these. All right, and so then in terms of timing, TxDOT's going to be done with the construction of the bridge at the end of this year. And so our plan is to start construction of the amenities the first quarter of next year, and we should be open basically 2 years from now on that first phase. And then next slide, let's see, is just a couple of views of the current construction. So you see you've probably driven under this tunnel if you've driven up 35 recently, and now they're working on that side of it. And once we go from phase 1 to phase 2, it goes from being a bridge to a tunnel over the freeway. So That it gets to be a little bit more expensive on phase 2, and we've got pretty significant fire and life safety equipment requirements that are needed once we get there. So that's why we're working with our public partners to identify funding for phase 2. But we're excited about the progress we're making on the first phase. And like I say, lots of folks, when I'm kind of on the north side of town, people are like, is that thing really happening? And I'm like, oh, it's happening. It's under construction. You take a drive. So we're excited about the possibilities. And I think that might be it. Yes, thank you. Thank you. So I will happy to take any questions. Sure.
So this might be kind of biased based on the crowd here. It was interesting that I saw you mention the whole percentage of how much value is getting added to like DFW, right?
Mm-hmm.
And most of the tax base on 90% above 35, you said.
Mm-hmm. 30.
So there's something of that nature that you mentioned, right? And I think it's interesting that this whole thing was maybe made to address that problem, or at least help alleviate that problem. When this itself, I think, ignores one half of southern Dallas, which is like Pleasant Grove. So can you speak to the fact that does that even address the other side of half of or a quarter of Dallas that's not being represented here?
I cannot speak to that because I don't know what the city's plans are for Pleasant Grove. I do know that the Loop has just announced a massive trail system that will go through. Did you hear about the donation from Encore of a huge parkland that will be in Pleasant Grove?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So
there's trails, like bike trails connecting everything, but in terms of, I don't know, it seems like they're funding dollars towards like the main organs of Dallas, something around DFW or the center of Dallas, but leaving like the rest of the outskirts kind of still in the same place. They're still right now.
well, I can't speak to that. You should speak to elected officials about the plans for that. I do know that the decision this project, the idea for this project actually came from community members. So when TxDOT came and started doing some public meetings around the work they were going to do on the freeway, they had plans to, basically what they're doing is widening the freeway all the way to 67. They kind of slid in one public meeting, and a couple community members went to that public meeting and sort of said, hey, while you're here, we want an amenity that is like the one up north. So I would say people in Oak Cliff, and if any of you all have been here a while, a closed mouth doesn't get fed. And so it's important for people to be advocating for what they want for their communities. And certainly in Oak Cliff, we've never gotten anything handed to us. It's been all about people working hard and pushing and asking. So I would encourage, if Pleasant Grove is the community you're from and that you care about, that you do that with public officials, because that's...
Yeah, so I grew up there.
Yeah.
And she came back to Oak Cliff from growing up here, as a kid. But the reason I came back is because they have such good amenities and relative to what I'm used to, right? So
Yeah. But I do think I do think it's on the radar. Again, I can't speak to the city's plans for that part of the city, but I do know that there was a massive donation of property from Encore. Actually, Philip could speak to that. He just walked in here. So he would be a good person to ask about that project. He was asking about investment in Pleasant Grove, and I said, well, you should yeah. So there you go. You guys should talk, and I'll take the next question.
April, can you elaborate more on the comment about gentrification and watering versus flooding, and what actually is in people's control versus market forces? Is there a TIF here that might help things, or just elaborate more on that?
So we are working with the city on the potential for a TIF and what the uses of those funds would be. Their thought is that we'd have to create a new TIF. So there was some discussion about whether we would extend existing TIFs, like the Oak Cliff Gateway TIF, or there's one on the east side that's a more transit-oriented TIF. But it's likely that we'll be creating a new one. Actually, I presented to City Hall this week, and one of the economic development folks was asked the same question, and he said they've got one on their radar, but they've been holding off because they haven't wanted to drive the market by the announcement of this TIF. So, you know, it's sort of like catch-22 a bit there. But that's why I think it's a policy discussion that needs to be taking place, because we can't just sort of wait for, I think we shouldn't be waiting for things to happen before we address them, you know? And so,
What policies would you see from a state legislature?
well, that's what we're working on. What is, like, what's possible, you know? Like, because there have been several efforts in the past, so our state rep around the park is Jessica Gonzalez, Representative Gonzalez, and she had a bill that she authored last year, and several others did, but none of them went very far. I think there would be a benefit in us working together. So instead of having kind of one-off bills, having a coalition of folks that is working towards that. And so that's what, like, we started pulling together the park projects, and Philip and others were talking about how we can partner in advocating for something that, you know, can get us baby steps towards the final outcome. But it's hard to do. It is definitely hard to do. There are some other folks that have ideas about like not even dealing with the state and trying to work on something locally, and like maybe using TIF funds to offset. I'm not sure where that will go, but all of that's kind of under discussion right now. Yeah. Sorry, I know that wasn't a very specific answer, but that's what I know. So we're kind of working towards what are the policy tools, what's in the toolbox that can be used. There's stuff at the city, there's stuff at the county, but the big kahuna is really the state. So.
Any other questions?
Yes.
And looking at the renderings, I did not notice a lot of native-looking plants, and I was just,
Yeah, actually, I didn't speak to it specifically because it's in phase 2. But our landscape architect is Chuck McDaniel, who with SWA. He's a longtime Oak Cliff resident, very, very in tune with the Blackland Prairie, and so a lot of the plantings will be native. And then there's actually in the second phase, if you go backwards to the master plan, there's actually backwards. One more, and then. No, sorry, the master plan that has the numbers. Mm-hmm.
there is a plan to have extended area with native plants.
Yes, it's actually called the Blackland Prairie Garden right here. So it's kind of right there. Mm-hmm. And then up at the top. So yes, anyways, very in tune with, yes. Mm-hmm. Did you have a question? Okay, I thought you had your hand up. Okay.
I just want to say I think this is amazing.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for how much you put into it. It looks beautiful. I'm very excited to see how it goes.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Awesome. Well, let's thank April again.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Good job.